died unexpectedly before I had a chance to finish with Oliver. So the last point I would like to make about this musical is really about the title character and the resolution of his story. So if you remember Oliver in the first act, he's a sweet little blonde-haired angel, and he sings this tearful song, "Where is Love?" And he basically looks for love throughout the musical, and then he is adopted by the kindly Mr. Brownlow. And this is really a little problem I have with Oliver. And the resolution that the creators of this show decided to introduce, namely to make Oliver a real lost relative, a blood relative of Mr. Brownlow. It turns out, if you watch the film especially, there is a portrait on the wall of a young woman who looks exactly like Oliver, and it turns out that this was Mr. Brownlow's daughter, who ran away because she was pregnant and ashamed, and she gave birth to her son and died before the family could retrieve him. So Mr. Brownlow is Oliver's real life grandfather. And my question is, does it really add something to the musical, or rather takes away from its impact? Would Mr. Brownlow care for an orphan who's not his blood relative? Is it the blood speaking? Is it this kind of myth that you can meet a person you never encountered before and know straight away if you are related by blood to them? So this is perhaps something I would omit, and I would really make Mr. Brownlow just a kindly stranger who cares about the homeless children in the Victorian surrounding. But anyway, it didn't really take away from the popularity and success of Oliver, and many of the tropes of Oliver were taken up by another blockbuster, the second example today, namely Les Miserables, or colloquially speaking, Les Mis. One of the great mega musicals, one of the greatest mega musicals of the 1980s. Quite interestingly, this was also perhaps the only, definitely the first international production, the production that didn't start in the English-speaking world, and it does not use the English language novel as the basis. So it's based on Victor Hugo's 19th century novel Les Miserables from 1862. It was written in France and in the French language by Claude Michel Schoenberg, the music, and Alain Boublil with the lyrics. The lyrics were then translated into English. So this is the first international musical, global musical. It premiered, the French original premiered in Paris in 1980, and it was seen by the legendary British producer Cameron Mackintosh, who decided to transfer it to London. And the English language adaptation was made, and the result was that Les Miserables has been the longest running musical in the West End in London, and the second longest running musical in the world, after you may remember the off-Broadway show The Fantastics, which kind of parody or a version of Romeo and Juliet as well. So again, this is based on a classic 19th century novel, a big novel. Actually, this is one of the novels I knew before I knew the musical, and I had the edition in 4 volumes of Les Miserables. So the, the main problem with this musical, just like most musicals based on the classic literature, is what to omit, which elements of the story to keep and which to do away with. In the case of Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, of course, all the descriptions, and there are many descriptions in the novel, were omitted, and many of the backstories. So we have the central character, Jean Valjean, and his life, his road to redemption. We'll talk about it in a little moment. Plus, we have a lot of tropes that proved to be very successful in Oliver. So we have poverty, we have the underworld, the criminal underworld, something that you also may remember from West Side Story. So this is really becoming a formulaic musical with all those archetypal stories. So we have poverty, we have the criminals, we have some archetypal characters, like again a mistreated child, this time a sweet little girl called Cosette. She's even in the logo of the musical, so just like Oliver, a sweet little blonde-haired orphan who sings the tearful song. And another child, a cheeky little brat, like the Artful Dodger. Here, of course, this is Gavroche. So the street urchin, the kind of streetwise child. Plus, of course, we have a fallen woman with a heart of gold. Just like Nancy was in Oliver, now we have even 2 such characters. So it's like Oliver on steroids. Of course, the first such character is Fantine, Cosette's mother. And to a certain extent, although she's not exactly a fallen woman, it's Eponine. So again, a poor girl who is tragically in love, who sings a torch song. So we had one dramatic torch song in Oliver. We have at least 2 dramatic torch songs in Les Miserables. So it's like taking everything on steroids. This is how it works, and this was an interesting musical because it was a risk, basically a financial risk for Cameron Mackintosh. Many potential investors thought that it was too risky, that it wouldn't really fly. And if you remember this documentary, The Story of Musicals, about British musicals by the BBC, you have the whole backstory of the first production of Les Miserables in Barbican Centre and with the help of Royal Shakespeare Company. So this was one of the musicals that was successful with the audiences, with the ticket buying public, and not really with the critics. But of course, it didn't stop them from becoming the longest running musical in the West End, and of course. You may check even the Wikipedia page, all the awards and accolades that this musical got. And some of you may have seen 2012 film adaptation with a stellar cast of Hugh Jackman as Valjean, and Russell Crowe and Anne Hathaway, who got an Oscar for Fantine, and Helena Bonham Carter and Sacha Baron Cohen as the Thénardiers, and Amanda Seyfried and Eddie Redmayne as the young lovers, Cosette and Marius. We'll talk about the differences between the film version and the stage version. I hope you have seen some stage version first, because I still think it's better. I still think that the mega musicals really are very theatrical and they really fly on stage and not so much in the film. However, the film was a valiant attempt. I was not entirely convinced, but I salute the valiant attempt, especially what they did with the singing. They tried to record the singing on set rather than in post-production. Brave didn't really work for me, but it was brave. So we continue about Les Miserables in a moment. Mm-hmm.